Hello, hello everybody. Welcome again. How are you doing? How has been your day or how was your night as the case may be? Okay, so today we'll be discussing trauma responses. What do I mean by trauma responses? These are ways we survived or coped with childhood. Trauma responses oftentimes are embodied from childhood. So by the time we become adults, it becomes automatic, just like a default setting. That's what you go to when you're triggered. There are two major trauma responses that we all know. Everybody did biology. We know that a bit. There's fight and flight response. The way I would explain that is if you have a bear chasing you, you have two options. If you check that you can really beat or kill this bear as the case may be, chances are you would want to fight it. But if you feel okay, this I'm not a match for this, you want to take a flight, which is run in the opposite direction. That's what I mean by fight or flight. But then as children experiencing trauma in the hands of their parents or caregivers, many times they cannot fight or take a flight from their caregivers on whom they depended on for sustenance and livelihood. So that brings two other trauma response on board. There is the freeze response. So still using the analogy of that bear, you can't fight this bear, you can't take a flight because you're boxed in a corner. There is freeze response, which allows you to fake being dead. And the bear would many may lose interest because bears are not interested in dead animals. They want to eat a living being. They take delight in their prey struggling as they try to eat it, so to say. So freeze is a way you could fake being dead. Now, how does it translate to childhood experiences? Freeze many times is dissociation. So there's a child who is being abused by a parent or by a relative or by an adult that they can't run from and they cannot fight. So they freeze. Freeze is like dissociation. Your body is there, but psychologically they check out. It's like the brain's ingenious way of allowing them survive such experiences without having untenable adverse effect to their psyche. So many times they will check out from such environments, from such homes mentally, even though their embodied presence is still in that house. That's for freeze response. Then fawn response, still the analogy of that bear. It could just be that such an individual then throws himself or herself at the mercy of the bear. You can't fight the bear, you can't take a flight, you cannot freeze or fake being dead. So just surrender and be at the mercy of such a bear. So how this translates to childhood is such children just surrender to whatever the parents want. They yield, they are just like the people pleaser, they just whatever you want, even if it is against their core, just for that need to maintain that parental attachment, to sustain that relationship that they have with their parents. But as adults, this does more damages to them, to their personality, to their sense of worth, to their psychological well-being than any benefits it does. Because by the time we're adults, these childhood survival mechanisms, these childhood trauma responses still continue to play out. Now they are many times automatic. We're not even aware we're doing them. We don't need to sit to think that this is the way I will cope with this trigger. It just by default shoots out of us and we play life like that. So what are the common manifestations of these four trauma responses? I'll start with the fight response. I told you fight, those are those that really fight. They fight the bear. So they fought their way out of childhood. And the manifestations you'll see in an adult will be at all costs, they must preserve themselves. So there's self-preservation at all costs, and worth preservation at all costs. And this could be explosive angers and outbursts. You don't need to say so much for them to ask you, Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? You've heard that question very commonly if you're a Nigerian, if you're an African person. Because the littlest thing triggers their sense of worth, triggers their security, triggers if they feel attached enough. So explode. They have explosive temper, they have anger outbursts. These are the people who are very aggressive. They have very angry behaviors. The so to say rageaholics. A little thing just needs to trigger them and they are in a fit of rage. They have a tendency to want to control others. These are the bullies in school. They can't hear other people's point of view. It has to be their own point alone. And they have a pronounced sense of entitlement. They demand perfection from others at all costs. These are also those who embody the fight trauma response, and they tend to have dictatorial tendencies. Many of our military head of states several decades ago had this dictatorial tendency. For what is worse, many of them also embody these fight trauma responses. Now, some psychological diagnoses that these individuals could have, they could be sociopaths, they could be narcissistic. Many times, people with fight trauma responses are narcissistic. Then they could have conduct disorders, oppositional disorders, and the likes. Then for those who have flight response, I told you flight is they check out in the opposite direction. They check out physically. So now, as an adult, the way they check out from the emotional turmoil or from needing to sit with their thoughts, needing to sit with their feelings is they could be obsessive or they could have compulsive behavior. So there is a behavior that they engage in repeatedly, just so as to avoid feeling, so as to avoid experiencing the thoughts in their head or the feelings that comes with such thought. Addiction is also a flight and trauma response, because that's a compulsive pattern of a behavior that doesn't serve them positively. Then they oftentimes will have feelings of panic and anxiety. They're always rushing around. They cannot sit still. They cannot relax. Relaxation feels very weird. Like, how can I just sit and not have anything on the agenda? It feels very weird. It feels very unusual. Because when they dare to sit still and they're not engaged in something, maybe an activity or a behavioral addiction, then their thoughts come. And with it comes the feelings and the emotions that they've been trying to avoid all their life. So oftentimes such people cannot sit still, they cannot relax. They are the overthinkers, they are the over worriers. But many times they overthink, they over worry, and they then find something just to escape such thoughts. Just to escape such thoughts, because they never really were equipped to sit with it and learn to process it early on in life. Then they are oftentimes the workaholic. Now, don't get me wrong, hard work is important. But when we work so hard that we don't have a life outside the work, and we don't know what it means to relax, or relaxation scares us and feels very strange, such an individual may be bordering around workaholism. Workaholism again could also be on the spectrum of addiction. It's just that it looks like a respectable addiction because they bring money home, they look well put together. But any form of addiction, someone pays the price. A workaholic father, the children pay the price, the marriage pays the price, because he's never at home to feel the emotional connection that builds and bonds a house and raises and will raise a wholesome child. Okay, then these individuals who also have a flight response oftentimes try to micromanage situations and other people. They are perfectionistic. They cannot afford the emotional discomfort of something going outside their plan, so they will micromanage. They cannot afford to delegate because they embody this fear of what if they don't do it as well as I expect them to do. And all of this is just a way to avoid them feeling the anxiety that comes with things not going as they expected, because that was their narrative as children. Then I said they're always on the go, they're always busy doing things. You would hardly find them just sitting still, just relaxing with a cup of tea or a cup of water, or a cup of whatever it is you drink, and I'm hoping it is something good. Okay, so they're always on the go. Then they want things to be perfect. I've said they are perfectionistic and they are overachievers. Now, what do I mean by overachiever? I don't mean um, people who want to do great in life. I mean, those who, for whom no amount of certification fuels their sense of worth. It is always on to the next thing, and financially, it is always on to the next deal. You talk of beauty, it is always on to the next thing. You talk of what learning skills, it is always on to the next thing. And it's not just for the fun of wanting to learn, it is like a means of competing and trying to be the best at it. And such competition gives them a drive, and that drive takes away the need to sit with the thoughts and experience discomforting emotions. So it's like they're taking a flight from their own experience, personal experience of their thoughts and their emotions. And some common psychological diagnosis that these people could have, they could have obsessive compulsive disorder, they could have panic disorder, they could have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they could have panic disorder, they could have mood disorder, which is depression and anxiety. Now, to the freeze response, I told you freeze are those who fake being dead. So the bear lose interest in them. And as children, these are people that check out emotionally, even though they are still there physically. Manifestations that these people have is they're always spacing out. By space out is they could be having conversation with you, but they could very well not be there. Their mind is gone. It's just the body that is there. In classroom, this will manifest as children who cannot follow explanations, or students who are writing exams and get carried away in the midst of the exam till they say time is over, only for them to realize that their thoughts are taking them out of the exam room. It was just the body that was there. And many times such people report feeling unreal, like they live in another person's body, because it's almost like the mind is doing its own thing, the body is doing its own thing. Excuse me. Then these people oftentimes they want to hibernate. What do I mean by hibernation? These are people that will tell you they are very good without seeing people, seeing other human beings for weeks. They like their own personal space, but to an extreme. Please, I'm not talking about being introvert here. These are people that they could be indoors for weeks, months, yeah, on hand, without seeing people, and they are good. And there's no longing for connection. It's an anomaly. It's not a gift. Okay? Then they isolate from outside world. I already explained that. They dissociate. Dissociation, I can say this 100 times. The body is there, the mind is gone. Other ways it will manifest is someone who is reading a book and goes from page 1 to 20 and does not know how they got to page 20 because their mind checked out on them. Or someone who is watching a movie and by the time the mind comes back into the body, the movie could very well be over. And you're wondering, could anything be wrong with me? No, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just the ingenious way your mind coped with the adverse experiences of childhood. But now as an adult, it's not serving you. It's causing more havoc than any benefit, and chances are it's interfering with academics. So such people will struggle in school, not because they're not inherently intelligent, but inability to focus is a big deal for any form of academic or professional success. Such people also have brain fog. It's like the mind is clouded, they can't just focus. Okay, then they're oftentimes scared of achievements. They don't like competitions because of the demand and the challenge it takes to even focus and succeed. So they would rather just check out than try to engage in any form of competitive and intellectual competitive engagement. Then a few of them would also report feeling dead or lifeless. Remember we said freezes, such a patient fake, such an individual fakes being dead in the face of the bear, in the presence of the bear. Their childhood self, the inner child, feigned being dead emotionally as a way to cope, which really helps them cope, because otherwise they would not survive to see the adulthood they now experience. But now as an adult and they still dissociate so many times, life just goes by and they're wondering, how did we get here? And there are so many adults who still feel like they are still the child part in the adult body. That again, time was frozen, but the body continued to grow. The mind was frozen for so long. Now, some common psychological diagnoses that these people could have is clinical depression. Schizophrenia is common with them. They could have attention deficit disorder. Now, fly to have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Hyperactivity is they can't sit still. They're up and down, they're doing one thing after the other. For freeze, it's just attention deficit disorder. There's no hyperactive components. The attention deficit is from the dissociation, but they are not flitting up and down, going, they are just frozen somewhere, but the psychological and the emotional part has checked that. Okay, they could also have dissociative identity disorder. That's for freeze. Now for fun, these are the people pleasers, those who just surrender in childhood, just submit, just so that things could be okay. That was the only way they could be under the radar in their childhood. And these are people pleasers at all costs. They would please people just so that they get liked. People don't complain about them. People, it's like their inner child is still scared of being criticized, being judged, being unloved, because that was their biggest fear in childhood. So they are people pleasers. They're scared to say what they really think, again because the inner child is scared of being judged, being left alone, being unloved, being unwanted. So now in the adult body, they are scared to say what they really think. They talk about others instead of themselves. These are people that if they're having conversation, they could be mute and let everybody take a turn without really saying what is in their own mind. They flatter others in order to avoid conflicts. That was how they survived childhood. Now this is how they are surviving adulthood. But this at this point now is not even needed because the adult body can cope. But the inner child still feels that this coping mechanism is still a necessity for them to do adulting properly. They are the, so to say, angels of mercy, always trying to pacify, just trying to look for peace, even at their own detriment. They are overcaring to a fault. People that they care so much it almost pisses you off. Like, care for yourself and leave me alone. Please, you understand what I'm talking about? Leave this person and just take care of yourself. They look like they are caring too much. The common colloquial term people will take is used for them is that they are suckers. More like they just take everything that anybody hands down to them. Like doormats, that's also a very common term that people use for them. Like they're walkovers, they're pushovers. These are people who embody the fun trauma response. Then they can't stand up for themselves. Many times they have problems saying no. They are easily exploited by others because they can't stand up for themselves. They can say no. People ordinarily exploit them. They are oftentimes hugely concerned with social standing and fitting in. Then they are the so to say yes man or yes woman. You can always trust them to say yes. They would at least say no. If it's responsibility, they will say yes. So chances are one person that not because they are really that they really want to be that responsible, but because they are scared of disappointing people. You drop anything on them, they say yes. So they're carrying much more weight. They are the so to say caretakers, if I can use that word. They're carrying more weight than they ordinarily should because they just have to people please to survive childhood. And now as adults, they think they also still need to people please for them to be liked. Okay, so what are some psychological diagnoses that these people usually people have fun trauma response will usually have? They're oftentimes codependent in toxic relationship. They are oftentimes victims of toxic relationship, and they just have a victim kind of lifestyle. Okay, now why are we discussing this? Not to point fingers at anybody's coping mechanism. I will keep saying it. We're all works in progress. Everybody has one way or the other. They survived childhood, but it served us in childhood. It doesn't serve us in adulthood now. So it's to now check and see which of these do I embody a lot. And sometimes some people embody two responses. A common mix is flight and freeze. A common mix is fight and flight. So there are some people that will embody both. But to now ask oneself in adulthood now that do I still need this? Do I still need to get into a fit of rage every time someone says something? Then why am I excuse me please, Why am I working so much at the detriment of my family? My children do not see me. The marriage is on the brink of divorce, but the work is doing excellently well. Am I running away from something? And to someone who's struggled with addiction, to realize, okay, this is at best a flight response. I'm just running from something. Because self-discovery is the first step towards any significant change. And of course, when you begin to identify this, the next time such a response wants to come through because there is a trigger, it will allow you to at least be mindful about the response that is coming through. And mindfulness again allows you to be aware that, okay, so this is what I used to cope in childhood, now showing up in my adult body. And you examine the situation with the wisdom and the consciousness of an adult and realize, do I really need to check out of this conversation because I don't like it? Or can I say what is on my mind? And for the people pleaser, you can assess the situation with the maturation and the understanding of an adult and realize, do I still need to people please these people? Or can I really say what is on my mind and realize I can be liked for me? I'm no longer that little girl or that little boy that just have to please people to be accepted, to be loved, to be wanted. And by, as we are aware, as we examine each of these responses mindfully, we would be able to take some intentional, reparative, moves, if I can use that word. Pick what works for you out of those responses, see what has not served you, and begin to drop them. So, until next time, wish you a wonderful, wonderful day.